With each passing week, I'm starting to wonder more and more if Ashton Jeanty is a real human being. So far, he's ran the ball 95 times for 1,031 yards and 16 touchdowns. He's averaging an absurd 10.9 yards per carry, is the frontrunner for the 2024 Heisman Trophy, and right now is playing himself into being a top 10 NFL draft pick. Jeanty is truly breaking college football, and many around the Boise State program and who followed him throughout his life saw this one coming. Jeanty was hyped up all offseason long, but no one in the national media really talked about him much. He's put the world on notice, and in today's video, we're going to talk about how Ashton Jeanty went from an underrated recruit to the best player in college football right now, and a guy who could win the Heisman Trophy. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the insane rise of Ashton Jeanty. So in order to understand how Jeanty got to this point, we first need to go back in time. Everything about his football foundation is unconventional. That is how one of the best running backs in the state of Texas, who's built like a tank, ended up at Boise State instead of some other big-time program. He was mature, and that was because of his father, Harry. His dad served in the military, as he ended up living in Florida, Virginia, Texas, and of course, Italy. He was a well-traveled youngster who was exposed to so many different cultures and people early on in his life, and he definitely had to fight. His father was obviously in the military, as I said, so he moved around a lot when he was growing up, and was in Italy from 7th to 9th grade. That was definitely interesting. He'd play against military schools, but he wanted better competition, and he wanted to take the sport more seriously. His future high school coach, Jeff Rayburn, can still picture the first time he met Jeanty. All he heard was this kid was part of a military family that had just moved back to the States after a stint in Italy. Then Jeanty walked into the room. He was big for a sophomore, and he remembered that. But he'll never forget that smile. Coach Rayburn said, quote, "If you've been around him at all, you know what I'm talking about." He actually didn't join Lone Star's football team until his sophomore year, though. He was a military brat and transferred from Naples High School to Texas in 2019. Jeanty pulled out his huddle tape of the Italian-based football team, and it was impressive, but it was just impossible to judge the talent level of the dudes on the field, let alone how that would translate to American football. It's a little bit of a different world, to be honest, but it would translate just fine. Rayburn learned that in a hurry, but there was still one problem. That Lone Star High team was loaded. There was a senior running back coming back, a junior tailback, a guy named Jaden Dixon, who's now at Oklahoma State, and then 4-star receiver Marvin Mims, who's currently in the NFL. Soon enough, Rayburn found out that Jeanty could play almost any position on the field, but he knew there was more depth in his offensive skill sets. So Jeanty got stuck on defense at safety. He also played outside linebacker and even played defensive lineman. Rayburn always knew that Jeanty was a natural offensive player, so when most of Lone Star's talent graduated, Jeanty moved back to offense. He was, as his coach said, a receiving and running back. He made sure to emphasize that Jeanty was truly a receiver/running back, which meant he played a little bit of tailback, but was mostly a slot guy. He ended up making the transition back to offense and finished with 1,200 all-purpose yards and 15 touchdowns, and most of his work was done on the receiving end, as he led the team with 55 catches for 816 yards and 7 touchdowns. His coach said, quote, "I truly believe he's the best player in the state. I think if he was playing running back all last year, he would have been one of the top recruits in the country." Since then, Jeanty had received 13 offers from schools like Kansas, Boise State, and North Texas, and he was getting offers, but his story was even crazier. This makes his coach think about some what-ifs. He said, quote, "If he had played full-time running back his junior year, my guess he'd be at Texas or Alabama or one of those big Power 5 schools. Boise State and the people in Idaho can thank us for that." The first time former Boise State running backs coach Winston Venable got a peek at Jeanty was during what coaches call a watch party. Recruiting staffers and assistant coaches will gather in a room together and watch film of dozens and dozens of kids that the school has their eye on. When Jeanty popped onto the screen, the Texan was underwhelming. He said, quote, "It didn't excite us right off the bat." But that was Jeanty's junior year of film, the season when he was a slot receiver who notched a couple of carries. A little while later, though, when Jeanty had some senior year tape to boast, Boise State turned on the film again, and it was like, hey, this actually might be a guy who will fit exactly what we're looking to do. It's a guy who is very multiple, a guy who could line up in the backfield and take a handoff, line up in the backfield, motion out and play wide receiver, or a guy who can line up at receiver and run routes. Then there was his frame. Venable always remembered when Jeanty was on his official visit, and he had to take his obligatory recruiting pictures. Venable said, quote, "Ashton Jeanty, before he even was a freshman, took his pictures with the strength staff and did not look apart at all. I think Boise State is going to get him in his prime here, though, and we have yet to see the full Ashton Jeanty. He's still so young." He ultimately stuck with Boise State over Power 5 offers from Cal and TCU who would make late pushes, and he would stay loyal until signing day, saying, quote, "There were a few schools coming after me before, but I told them I'm 100% Boise." Going into his senior year, he had a chance to break some record for touchdowns. That list included legendary names such as Jonathan Gray, Kenneth Hall, Robert Strait, and David Overstreet. That is exclusive company that Jeanty will be surrounded by if he could keep up his prolific touchdown pace and Lone Star could make a deep playoff run. Jeanty said, quote, "It'd be amazing to join that group, and 2 years ago I wasn't even starting, and I was a backup defensive player." Finally, after 3 years in Texas, he took over as the starting running back, and the results were silly. Jeanty rushed for over 1,800 yards, had 810 yards receiving, and he finished with 41 total touchdowns, which was good for 5th in Texas and among the top 25 of every high school football player in America. Obviously, Lone Star had something in the water, as Marvin Mims had set the national record for receiving yards just a couple years earlier and then became a freshman All-American. Jeanty compared himself to Marshawn Lynch, as that was his favorite player. He ended up having a crazy career and was getting hyped for Boise State, but nationally no one knew who he was. Despite being on pace for one of the greatest seasons in Texas high school football history, he remained undervalued in recruiting circles. He was the 197th best player in Texas and in the class of 2022 there. Jeanty said, quote, "If somebody were to jump on board right now, they would have to offer me a better opportunity than Boise can. I don't know if that is going to happen." So he stayed put. According to 24/7 Sports, Jeanty was a 3-star recruit, the number 90 running back, and the 1,284th best player in the class of 2022. So how would he end up doing at Boise? Well, let's take a look. Jeanty had been hyped up ever since he graduated early and stepped on campus at Boise. He had remarkable size, he prepared and studied like a veteran, and he just darted around the field like he was playing in his backyard. Boise State has had some good running backs over its last couple of years. George Halani was good, and then Alexander Madison, Jeremy McNichols, Jay Ajayi, and Doug Martin all played in the NFL. That was some big shoes to fill, and as a freshman, Jeanty was solid. He ended up running the ball 156 times for 821 yards and 7 total touchdowns, and he was definitely becoming a bigger name for a freshman. His best game would come in their bowl matchup against North Texas, as he ran for 178 yards and a touchdown in that one. Going into 2023, Jeanty was a big deal. And after Andy Avalos ended up falling apart, Boise State was back to their winning ways. Last season he ran for over 1,000 yards, as he had 100-yard games against UCF, San Jose State, and Air Force, and then had 200-yard games against Colorado State and San Diego State. He also had 153 yards and a touchdown in their championship game against UNLV, and then against UCLA in their bowl game, he ran for 85 yards. In total, Jeanty had 1,347 yards and 14 touchdowns, and he also had 43 catches for 569 yards and 5 touchdowns through the air. Jeanty was crazy, and going into 2024, he probably could have transferred to a bigger school, but decided to stick around. Still though, he wasn't getting the kind of spotlight that people thought he deserved, but the coaching staff was super high on him. They all thought he was just like Doug Martin, and they thought he could have an even better career than Martin did. That was coming off a season in which he won the Mountain West Offensive Player of the Year and finished second in the entire FBS with 165 all-purpose yards per game. As I said, he had 6 games where he went for over 100 yards, and he became the first FBS player since 2019 to go for 1,000 yards and 500 receiving yards in the same season. He was all-conference everywhere and was incredibly gifted, and so far in 2024, he's literally gone mad. He went for 267 yards and 6 touchdowns in Week 1 against Georgia Southern, went for 192 yards and 3 touchdowns in a loss to Oregon, 127 yards in a loss to Portland State, and then he went for 259 yards and 4 touchdowns against Wazoo, and most recently in the first half, went for 186 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's on pace to have the best single season in college football history for any running back, and he's doing it only playing halves of football right now. Jeanty has played his way into the top 15 of the NFL draft right now, is the frontrunner for this year's Heisman Trophy, and is truly the most electric player in the game. I have no idea how this guy is that good, and him winning the Heisman would be crazy. Usually it's a Power 5 quarterback, not a Group of 5 running back. While Jeanty has been insane on the ground, he has not caught as many passes out of the backfield, but they honestly don't really need him to. Currently, as I said, he's the top running back prospect for 2025, and has taken over names like Donovan Edwards and Ollie Gordon. I feel like I am kind of cutting Jeanty short on how good he is, but the kind of stats he's putting up can't really be explained. I can't really overstate them enough, and what he's doing is historic, plain and simple. But we'll have to wait and see how he finishes the year, as hopefully he doesn't get hurt, or hopefully defenses don't find a way to stop him. It'd be kind of cool to see him win the Heisman Trophy, but I would still doubt it ultimately happens, as it'll probably go to some sort of quarterback that has an insane end of the season. But we'll have to wait and see. What do you guys think? If you're a Boise State fan, how is Ashton Jeanty this good? Do you think he should win the Heisman? And what other prospect should I do a profile video on next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.